Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening, depending where you are. Welcome to Connect Africa. So we are here on Sunday on a weekend at this hour of the day. So not only we bring you topical or hot issues around the world, but this is a Pan-African platform. So we bring you topics that are research based that will give you an understanding whether what happened in the past contemporarily or also in the future, with regards to the ongoing oppression and this neo-colonization that's happening in the continent by the West, of course. So for today, our topic is what is driving the US or the United States of America and the West in its continued pursuit of total world domination. Yeah, it seems, yeah, we know about it, kind of a cliche, right? But do we really understand it, the root cause of it? So that's why we are here. As usual, Kwame is here with us. Welcome, Kwame.
Thank you very much, Mahlet. You look very beautiful today, and
With
thank
my
you.
African attire. Huh? Thank you.
Yeah.
It's from Ghana. Let me just promote Ghana.
Okay. Yeah, it's African wear. So thank you to everyone who's paying attention to the platform and who's watching us. We thank you, everyone who supported the channel. Yes, you need to continue, to support us to grow as a platform, as an alternative African platform, which is, positively biased towards Africa. We need to be that. We need to put out our own African narrative and expand our voices because our voices, have been damned for a very long time, and a lot of people have been speaking for us as Africans. So we need to take our own voices back and be able to uplift ourselves. So this is very important. So we want to thank everyone who has supported Connect Africa and continues to support Connect Africa in a different ways. Of course, watching the videos, sharing them, and also, of course, supporting the PayPal account and super chat. Different ways of supporting. So we appreciate you really.
Yeah, okay. So thank you indeed. So as usual, we go to the historical background of it. So in this continued US and its allies, the West, continued pursuit of total world domination, non-stop. Okay, from I don't know, as far as we can try to remember. How did, first of all, how did we get here? Can you give us a brief analysis or history of the world and how the West came to gain this much domination of the world, most part of our world today.
Yeah. So as we see the United States today, actually things did not start with the United States dominating. Currently the United States, you can look at it as a continuation of course European civilization and domination, but Europe in itself starting to become very powerful globally. It is not been very far if you look at world history and how empires have lasted on the world, how different empires have lasted and dominated, of course, the world, have ruled the world. If you talk about the Chinese, of course, if you talk about the Kemetic Empire, the Egyptian Empire, of course, you can talk about Ethiopia, and you talk about the Indians, at different stages. If you look at how long these empires lasted, like the Egyptian Empire, lasted for a very long time, more than 6,000 years, 5,000 to 6,000 years. So all these periods, the Europeans actually were nowhere in history, all right? And a lot of, other African historians have mentioned this. We can talk of Dr. Henry Clark, who even pointed this out precisely. So you talk about the Chinese, which is also a continuing civilization, like like Ethiopia and India, of course, with those characteristics, what we would call that a civilizational state. So Europe was not like that, and of course with the United States. The United States is just a result of Europe. It's just a recent creation of Europe. The United States countries like Canada, New Zealand, Australia. All these are just Europeans who came in and dominated these places due to certain reason. But before, uh, we could say before the 15th century, Europe had not even been, nowhere to making a major contribution, to world history. So proportionately, you can say that they controlled about 6%. If you look at populations and where they were, looking at the location of the world. Like, for example, if you put Africans on the African continent, we control maybe about 25 to 26% of the total land mass of the world. So when you go to the United States, when you go to the Europeans before they left Europe to go to Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and all these places, they controlled about 6% of the planet. All right. When you look at the land where they are, Europe itself, especially Western Europe, that is where, the English, where they are, Britain and all these Germans and stuff like that. So, but the land was very small. The land was very small, and they had populated the place, okay, due to overproducing. Okay, of course, children, they produce too many. The population had grown hugely, and of course this brought a lot of problems, for them. That the place was congested, to be precise. And diseases also, they started breaking out, and that is why you see that even when they went to the United States, they brought a lot of diseases which killed the local people, which killed the native people, in the United States. So this pressure on the available resources in Europe forced the Europeans to go out there to look for alternatives. And of course, that is where we see, in the 15th century, people like Vasco da Gama, who came across the African continent, finding a route to India, what they were saying, finding a route to India where they wanted to go and find gold. And we see, the other, Spanish and Portuguese kings, financing voyages across the Atlantic to find the United States, where they wanted again to find gold. So it was a combination of the pressures in Europe itself, and then later on, to find gold. Greed, of course, it was, greed was part of it. So that is how they came to dominate the world. And so that domination has gone on from empire to empire, European empire to empire, like from the Portuguese to the Spanish, and then from the Spanish, then we went to the Dutch, and then from the Dutch, and then we went to the British. All right, and of course we had the Romans later on at the start, during the first century. We had the Roman Empire, which was, these ones, they were not really very strong that they dominated the world. They dominated the world, but more so, they even destroyed Europe itself because of the infighting within itself. Even when you talk about Alexander, the so-called Alexander the Great. So it is later on, in the 15th century, that they were able to master even the technologies which they were copying across the world. Like, for example, gunpowder, from China, which they went and used for making weapons, and they mastered that. So they advanced that technology. That technology was actually from China. And of course, other technologies which they got from around the world, whether it's from India and even Africa. Because we remember that in the 7th century, for example, the Moors went to Europe and colonized it and taught them a lot of things, taught them about music, taught them about hygiene, and taught them a lot of things. And this is documented. You can look out for the Moors. These were blacks, the black Moors. So they mastered this technology, and they used that in the 15th century. For example, boats, how to make boats and all that. And they continue to improve on. So that is how they moved out of Europe due to these factors. Then they went to the United States, and of course, they used different tactics to take over these lands. And they took over lands like Australia, for example, and they killed all the indigenous people. And they took over lands in New Zealand and of course Canada. In Canada, even the killings went on until recently in 1994. And some documents have come out that the Catholic Church was involved, in burying and killing, the indigenous children, young ones. Graves had been discovered recently, and the Catholic Church came out to even to apologize. So from that process, from like I said, from the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, and the British, and now what we have as the American Empire is a continuation of that process. Now, what we see is that they moved from controlling 6% of the world, of the global land mass. Now they control more than actually 30% of the global land mass. And that is where I don't agree with people who say that the whites are reducing in population. All right, because remember they were just 6%, even before the 14th century, before the 14th and 15th century, they were just 6%. Right now, they are more than, I think, close to 16% of global land mass. So that is a huge increase. It tells you that these people have, mastered the control of the world, that they have increased their population, they have increased their influence, and they have increased their control of the world from 6% to 35%. So, but of course, it is
So,
because of those.
Is this when you talk about the white? So it's the European, the North America, the Australia, Europe.
Yes. So, yes. So when you talk about Australia, North America, North America, which includes the United States and Canada, all these are Europeans, all people of, European descent. If you look at a country like, for example, the United States, it was formed by Britain. All right. Britain was colonizing it actually before 1776. And if you look at Canada, these are British mixed with the French. All right. Even right now, the queen is still, I mean, the king, the monarch, the British monarch is still the head of the Canadian, Canada as a country. That is why you have a prime minister over there in Canada. They don't have a president because the queen or the king, which is the British monarch, is still the head of that country. Even when you go to Australia and New Zealand, all these, they don't have presidents. They have prime ministers. Why? Because the British monarch is still the head of these countries. So it tells you that they have increased their control of global landmass. And the reason the reason why even today they are clinging on to the continued control and encroachment on other people's resources, like maybe we can talk about the African continent. You can talk about their encroachment, for example, in the South China Sea. You can talk about their encroachment in even in South America. All this is that continued domination to continue to bring those resources, which are controlled by those people, and even to annihilate them if it is possible. That is the process that is we are seeing that is continuing on, but it comes all the way, from the past.
It's good to add here. Somebody in the chat section said, actually not somebody, Dylan, can you be? Hello, welcome, and Afri, thank you for your kind words. So Dylan, yeah, Dylan said, but their increase, I think the white people increase in population has plateaued.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah, so I think what he means is that it has sort of kept off, and then it is, of course, they have been mentioning a lot of data has been coming out and saying that their population is right now is reducing, and of course, it's because of certain reasons. That one I don't rule it out at this particular point where we are, but the point I'm making is that for the last 600 years, all right, for the last 600 years, these people have increased their population from 6% to close to 16%. All right. So that should be very clear that they were just 6%, but they have increased, to 16%. And they have eliminated the native population to almost zero of which occupied America. And they eliminated the native population which occupied Australia and New Zealand to zero. And they occupied all these lands. You see the point I'm trying to make. So that's the point I'm trying to drive home. So regardless of how we look at it at this point, that their population may keep off maybe for certain reasons, but At the end of the day, if you look at for what happened since the last 600 years, these people have increased their population. You are muted, Mahlet.
Another question still on this one. Okay, maybe still the number of population, we might have it closer, like kind of a right number on both sides, black people and white people. But in terms of land mass, there is this argument that the way Africa is presented as a small continent, in the world map is not right, and even the geographical position of it. So can we say that you said because it's the landmass that we are owns only 26% Africa, right? So
Yes.
what do you say about that? This argument
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. So this argument, of course, it makes sense that the way it is presented is a different thing from the actual size. All right.
Mm-hmm.
The actual size as a continent, it occupies about 26% of global land mass. Okay, which
Okay.
is almost, it is also the African continent is also very close to almost 30%. Right. But for them, what we are talking about is a combination, bring even for them to bring their control to 30%, they are combining Canada, all right,
Mm.
the United States,
Mm-hmm.
all right, Europe,
Mm-hmm.
East, South, Western Europe, and then add on that Australia and New Zealand. So they are combining almost 5 territories. And of course, you can put in Argentina and all these, which mostly are controlled by Europeans, and of course, maybe to some extent Brazil. So you are combining almost, you know, uh, 3 to 5, 5 territories, 5 territories. And you look at Australia, for example, is almost a full continent. So you put all these into Africa, for them to get a land mass which is almost equivalent to Africa. So, of course, Africa is, like we said, is misrepresented pictorially, but in size, it is the correct size when you come to square meter, how many square kilometers which we have on the continent. Yes, but
So
even with that, they
this
had to combine a
domination.
lot of territories.
So the domination is purely referring now. The topic is only with regards to the landmass, right? Not
Yes,
not
so
politically
so
controlling.
now, when we talk about the land mass which they control directly, that's the amount they control directly, about 30%. But now,
Mm-hmm.
when we come to other issues like political and social controls,
Yeah,
that one, I think the extent is huge,
yeah.
because of course everyone will agree that currently we live in the European dispensation. All right, everyone will agree, because we are not in the Egyptian, dispensation, which passed about, maybe 6,000 years ago. We are not in the Chinese dispensation and stuff like that. So we are in the European, dispensation. We are not in the, the Native Americans or the ancient, South Americans, the Incans, and all these groups of people. So we are in the European, domination, dispensation. So we are in the European dispensation. So this means that when it comes to the control of politics, for example, economy, and then social order, of course, they have a larger oversized control, which is huge. That one is even difficult to quantify. Somebody could say maybe even 90% or 80%, because of how much they control the financial system, the economies. That if you don't agree, even ourselves, if we don't agree with anything that they agree with, and we are saying things which they don't like, they can switch off, the YouTube, and then we will not be able to use it. Things like that. They can switch off the payment system, because you have these Visa cards that you are using and
That
all
kind
this.
of
For
controlling.
those, yes, so they are controlling almost everything, almost 80% of global affairs when it comes to politics, when it comes to economics. Maybe on politics, maybe it could be 60%. I don't know. It could be 60 to 70%, but they control the narrative. That is the whole thing, that they can demonize anyone they want.
So
They control
media
the
is
media.
also another sect. So you have the land mass, you have the population, you have the
Yes,
land mass, you have the political system controlling, you have also the media.
Yes, yes. So when even you come to the landmass, what I put where they are domiciled currently, that is the one which is around at 30%. Now, when you go to other territories which they control indirectly, like for example, South America, all right, where you are talking about the Venezuelans, where they are disturbing a lot. Even right now, they are trying to overthrow the government in Venezuela, and they are trying to overthrow the government in Cuba, and all these countries where the United States and its Monroe Doctrine said that all South America belongs to the United States. All right, it's their backyard. This is what they say, that is their backyard. And of course, if you take also the influence which they have on the African continent, that whenever they want, they can come and take our resources. So that becomes, a much larger control. And of course, that is where politics and all the other issues come in, that they influence this process, of them, dominating. So if you add from the direct control which they have over their lands, the current lands, theirs and those which are not theirs, and the indirect, the control of course becomes oversized. But again, that control has gone on to slightly reduce. It is not like how it was, for example, let's say in the 18th century, in the 16th, 17th, 18th, and the 19th century, when they were, using colonialism, slavery, and all these systems. So that control again has gone on to reduce slightly.
Okay. Thank you, Kome, for that. Now let's go to my second question, which is, I think, which will elaborate more on the political system. Now, why is the U.S. led West, US and its allies, continuing on this path of antagonizing China, Russia, and of course, sabotaging us, Africa, and then on the other side, also threatening India?
Yeah, so I think because of how they are accustomed to this uh, life of dominating and luxury, all right, they are accustomed to power, and there is a thinking that has been created that they will perpetually be, on that trajectory. They thought that this is eternal, this is going to be eternal, that we are going to dominate the brown and the so-called yellow people, the black, brown, and yellow people of the world, right? But until 1804, when Haiti actually defeated France, and later on could defeat Britain and Spain, that thinking had never been into them. All right, their power had never been reduced. Okay, so that was actually the start of the reduction of their power, because 1804, when Haiti defeated France, Spain, and and Spain and Britain, and of course when they started fighting against each other. Remember that Britain was in command of the United States. It was a colony. It was its colony. Now they started fighting against each other. The ones British immigrants who immigrated to America and formed the United States, they rebelled. All right, they rebelled against their brothers who were colonizing them. Okay, so this was an infighting. So this infighting continued on. Now, when the British lost the United States in 1776 as a colony, they opened another war with France, because already they were competing with France. Okay, even when they had the United States as a colony, because it was one of their most lucrative, colony. So they were competing with France on production and the domination of Europe, because they were producing to supply Europe, in things like sugar and cotton. And for those who want to understand this, they can go out and read the book called The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James, all right, who wrote that book on the Haitian Revolution. This is very well documented, what was happening during that period in the 18th, 19, in the 18th and 19th century, later on. So they were accustomed to that. So they did not notice actually that this was weakening them. This infighting, they did not notice that it was weakening them. Now, Haiti got its independence. So the Haiti getting its independence, it brought a new sense, of awareness within the black people. Even when, of course, they went back after the defeat of this slavery by the Africans, they went back in 1884, which is famous, 1884, 1885, to partition the African continent. Of course, with the, with the exception of Ethiopia, which resisted the colonization. They continued on. They thought that this process is supposed to go on, so they decided that we have to change the form in which we are applying our domination, our continued domination, how we are going to continue dominating the world. But even with that, even though they succeeded at that, and of course they took over even places like, they had taken over places like India, which also became a colony, because after, the United States got its independence, and those British people in the United States got their independence, the British people now in England, they decided to go to India to colonize India, and start producing sugar and all the other items from India, all right, which they used to produce from the United States. And of course, all that was the desire to compete against France and defeat France, so that France will not dominate Europe and, take over the production, because it was about economic production. Okay, it was production of sugar and cotton. Those were the key items during that period. So Britain never wanted, or United Kingdom never wanted France to overtake it in production, because of the loss of the United States, which was a very lucrative colony for them. Now, even as this was going on, even as they had succeeded in partitioning the continent and sharing it by among themselves, and even going to India and even going to China, to a certain extent, to interfere in China, how it was governing itself, and even colonizing China to a certain extent, where they colonized places like Hong Kong, which they took on even up to 1997. That is when Hong Kong went back to China. They continued to fight against themselves. With all this success which happened, they continued to fight against themselves. So what they did not realize is that there was a new level of consciousness which was rising amongst the colonized people themselves. All right. So that consciousness, which brought people like Marcus Garvey and all the others, Martin Delaney, and all these Africans who were in the United States and the Caribbean, and they were saying, these Africans started agitating and saying that the African continent belongs to us. It doesn't belong to the Europeans. So some of these people, they started giving sermons all over, South America, in the Caribbean, others in the United States, others even in Europe, some of the blacks who had some level of freedom. So they started agitating and said that the Europeans must leave the African continent. They must get away from the African continent. So it was actually Africans who agitated a lot, and who brought in the independence movement. And you can even look at people like Ho Chi Minh, who liberated Vietnam. They learned most of, what they did. They were inspired, let me say, by Africans, people like Marcus Garvey. And then later on, when we see 1945, again, the war escalated between them, the Europeans, which led to that so-called, World War II. They fought World War One, of course, with Hitler and all these, and they fought World War One, where Napoleon and all these, they wanted to dominate Europe, and later on World War II with Hitler. All right, so all these was greed. They had gained so much control of the world that they did not even understand that they have so much control now, they should sit down and share. And so that is also what we are seeing today, that the situation has gone on to continue like that. But what they were trying to do, and what they are trying to do even up to now, is to retain that being accustomed, to the power and the wealth that they had gained. That is why it is creating, for example, a lot of anxiety in the United States and even in European countries when China, gains this edge over them, or the rest of the world gains an edge over them technologically. Because remember, when I was introducing this, I said that the reason they gained their advantages and were able to colonize the world is because they gained an edge in technology, and took these technologies actually from others. Even the United States itself, which we say that is the dominant technological superpower, the United States did not take these, did not gain these technologies on itself. When they defeated, for example, Hitler, they went and took the technologies. People like Benjamin Franklin, when they were just building the United States, when the United States was just an infant, country, and Britain was still dominating. People like Benjamin Franklin went to the United Kingdom to copy what was there, the technologies which were there. For example, the looms which they used to make to spin cotton. All right. So he went there and copied them and brought that technology back to the United States. And these are some of the key technologies that they used, of course, when it comes also to the refining of sugar. The reason why the United States Revolution happened, it was because Britain actually was taking sugar. Britain was taking sugar from the United States and sending it to Britain and repackaging it and brought it back to sell it. Okay, so they were using the United States sugar as
I have to say, it reminds me the looting of the crude oil from Nigeria and then selling it back.
is the same. So if
Oh
you
my
study
God.
actually, if you study history, it's the same thing. You can see the patterns. You can know what the people are trying to do. So they didn't come to Africa or they didn't come to the global south because of anything. It was because of markets. One, raw materials. First of all, they wanted, in the first place, when it came to the African continent due to slavery, it was because of labor. They wanted labor because these are the factors of production. If you're talking about factors of production, you talk about labor, you talk about machinery, and then you talk about capital. Now, labor and land, of course. All right, you talk about land, labor, okay, land, labor, and capital. These are the factors of production, and of course, you can add machinery in there, which helped to. But machinery, of course, can be looked at as labor, right? So that has not left. Even today, what we are seeing here is that they want the raw materials and they want the markets. So these are very important. The issue of labor was now replaced by almost machinery and the advance in technology. That's why we are talking about artificial intelligence, because the artificial intelligence and things like Chat GPT will help you to reduce the workload, will help you to reduce the labor. The automation, for example, when we talk about the automation, which China, of course, is leading in a lot of these things, it helps you to reduce the cost of labor and it makes you more productive. All right. So that is why we have this struggle between the United States against China. It is because of technology that China has gained an edge technologically. All right. And China is now dominating the markets. Okay. That is another thing. And the raw materials, when you hear about the demonizing of China in South America, the demonizing of China in Africa by the United States, what is it trying to do? It's trying to gain an edge on the raw materials. Remember what I told you, that when they came here for the partitioning of the continent, it was raw materials and the markets. Now China is dominating the markets and is dominating the raw materials. So they think that the best strategy is to come to Africa and demonize China so that China will not get the raw materials. Okay. And then they will steer up the markets that China will be, will be hated in these countries so that people maybe will not buy from it. So, which is not very possible. Now, the other thing, when you talk about, for example, the manufacture of, electric cars, you have seen that Biden has put huge tariffs on Chinese electric cars. This is, the technology part of it, which we say. Now, and then the markets, because remember the American automobile companies like Ford and General Motors and all these, they have been selling hugely in the Chinese market and dominating the Chinese market. And the United States has been complaining that China does not let full access, does not allow full access to its market. All right. Now they're seeing that things have turned around, that now once what was a market has become the producer. Now China is the producer of the vehicles and is also starting to produce its own planes. And they're saying this is a threat. So why are they saying a threat? It's a threat to American jobs. I think you have been hearing about these terms. You have been hearing terms like overcapacity, China overcapacity. This is a strategy to demonize the enemy because now he's coming after you, after your markets. He has taken over his own markets. Now you don't have even where to sell. But beside that, he's coming after your own market and take it, taking it from you. So now this creates a lot of fear. It has created fear in form of that we are going to become poor. All right, we are going to become poor. We have to fight back. But all this has resulted from the complacency which set in after 1945, because after 1945, a guy called Francis Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History, and he claimed that the West had taken over, it had finished. It's the same thing which happened in 1885, 1884 with the partition of the African continent. They thought that everything is done now. We sat, Bismarck brought them, and they sat in Berlin, and they divided the African continent, and they divided the world amongst themselves, and they just said it is now finished. There's no one else who's gonna, worry us. The world is ours. All right, now let us become rich. All right. So it's the same thing which happened in later on after 1945, after the rise of the United States. So now what happened is that Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History, which gave them the satisfaction, and they became complacent that they have now dominated the world. The neoliberal order. You hear about people like George Bush the first talking about the new world order, that they have created a new world order, and everyone must subscribe to that new world order. All right. So they forgot that during 1804 they had lost an amount of power, a certain amount of power, with the emergence of Haiti as a country. Even though the United States continued to dominate this hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, the so-called Western Hemisphere, and with the Monroe Doctrine, they forgot that they had lost some level of power during that period, that people had started taking back their property. Now, when it comes to independence, the emergence of independent states in Africa and India, and then China later on, 1949, where China unified its territory, people started taking back what belonged to them. All right. But these guys, they did not realize that. And then they continue to be complacent and write books like this, that the end of history, the Western world has taken over, or there's not going to be any, thinking apart from the Western. Okay, so everyone must subscribe to that, and everyone must follow what the West says, what the Europeans say. Everyone must, follow that. So that is what has driven them even up to today, where we are seeing. That is why you see that if you come out, even within the Western world itself, and you oppose them, then they outlaw you. All right, they remove you from platforms, they cut you from platforms and stuff like that, because they don't want to hear any opposing views. So they are like monopoly. They are people who are coming. They want to monopolize the power. They came with this thinking that it must be one. It must be them alone. It must be one God. For example, wherever they went, where people are worshiping other gods, they have different types of gods. They say no, remove everything. It has to be one God. And of course, we can talk about other things which are a little bit more funny. One wife and stuff like that. You went to other societies which had different, where they have many wives, and you say you have to have one wife. Now you have to have democracy is the only governing system. All right. There's no other governance system that is supposed to be out there. It's only the Western system. Okay. So that is where you see that when we have systems like the Chinese own, then they say that that system is authoritarian. All right. Demonize it and make it look like it is not legitimate. Our own is the one which is, our own is the only one which is legitimate. So to put it briefly, the formation of the United States has been the continuation of that process to preserve the welfare of the Europeans and all the other countries. And all the other people who came out of Europe and went all across the world to dominate the other parts of Europe. So they want to preserve their wealth and to preserve, what they took from other people, so that other people will not retaliate back.
Interesting. I know that you are trying to limit and squeeze it as much as possible. It can be a very wide topic and explanation But really, really interesting. Just one question out of curiosity, though. So we have our own as an African kingdom and queendom and civilization time because they have erased this from history. And our us also, we are not teaching our children that history. It's almost forgotten that there was a kingdom or a civilization, African civilization, before the invasion of Europe to Africa. When we think about, to the extent that when we think about civilization, we all think about the West, right? But there was Africa, we can say, and then there's Europe, the West in general. Now we have China. And Russia, maybe like the South, the powerful ones. Do you think the Africa will come back at some age, at some time?
Yeah, I think that Africa has been really devastated, really, really devastated, because for the last 600 years, these people that came and took over our society. In the first place, they took over our bodies, and they took over the mines, and they took over the resources and everything, land, everything that belongs to us, they took over, right? Even though internally, inside the societies, in the villages, for example, these some of these cultures remained preserved, and that is what we even retain today. But we were hugely devastated. But during the emergency of Haiti, when Haiti succeeded in overthrowing the three European countries which wanted to perpetually put it in the domination, that is when we gained, some hope. All right, we gained a lot of hope, and of course, people like Marcus Garvey also emerged, and all these movements, the civil rights movements, and the Nkrumahs, they emerged. All right, when these guys emerged, it gave us a lot of hope. And that's why you hear people like Nkrumah talking about the African personality. All right. If you look at Nkrumah's government, you see him, trying to restore. And even in his thinking, Nkrumah says that if you are talking about the rebuilding of the African continent, and of course for him, when you spoke about the African continent, he said that Africa belongs to all Africans, those on the continent, those in the diaspora. And he said that all black people are Africans, all right? All people, of African descent. This was one of his saying, that all people of African descent, whether they live in North, in South, or West, they are Africans and belong to the African nation. All these are Africans and belong to the African nation. So we were devastated, but there was that hope people like Nkrumah brought, and they brought a new hope that we can do reconstruction, even though we had a lot of devastation, because our cultures and our ways of life were not completely destroyed. Even though during that period, people like Nkrumah later on would come and be overthrown. And of course, when they overthrew Nkrumah in the country, it brought Africa backwards. A lot of things went backwards because he had started that process of reconstruction. He used to say that we have to get independence. When we get independence, all African countries should get independence. That was the first step for him when it came to our independence as Africans, and then consolidated the independence. All right. So for him, we had not yet actually fully gotten independence as Africans. We had only gotten political independence, but we had not yet gotten economic independence. And Nkrumah understood this very well. So he said that get political independence, consolidate that independence. Now, for him, the process of consolidating that independence, it was the unification of the continent, the unification of the independent states. Because if you did not consolidate the independence, then it was going to slip away. They were going to, it was going to get compromised. Okay, they were going to take it away again, that independence. And that is what happened actually, that the independence later on will be compromised. But what he had said is that get independence, consolidate it to unity, and then start the reconstruction process. So even for the reconstruction, actually, we had not started because we failed to consolidate the independence.
Yeah.
And so that is where you see that people don't understand what is going on even today. Or you blame, when you go to Nigeria, for example, you blame, oh, why is it that the oil cannot benefit the Nigerian people and stuff like that? It's
They did
because
not
we never
consolidate.
got, yes, we never consolidated, we never succeeded at consolidating, our independence. because of the heads of state. A lot of heads of states at that time did not understand what Nkrumah was talking about. Even for a smart person like Nyerere, Julius Nyerere said that after the death of Nkrumah in 1972, it took him 10 years of reading Nkrumah's work for him to understand what Nkrumah was talking about in the 60s, in the 1960s. So a lot of the presidents never understood what Nkrumah was talking about in the 60s. So, and he had a lot of work to do. So you can say that maybe he was so ahead. A lot of people say he was so ahead of his time that he was 100 years ahead of everyone. That was how Nkrumah was. That he understood the neo-colonial system. That if we don't consolidate our efforts, by coming together as people, as countries on the African continent, then the independence is meaningless. That's why at independence, actually, he said that the independence of Ghana is meaningless if it is not linked up with the total, liberation and unification of the African continent. So he knew that it is meaningless, that the independence itself was meaningless. It's not going to do anything if you don't consolidate it through unification. So that is what we see, like, for example, what is in Nigeria is because the building of the country did not happen by Africans and is not happening by Africans. So whatever is there is just a compromise, is a shadow of what is supposed to be the Nigerian state, which is being built by Africans. So now it is not being built by Africans. It's being built from outside. It's being controlled from outside. And of course, if you go on and read Nkrumah's if you go on and read Nkrumah's works like Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism towards colonial freedom, and all the other works like Class Struggle in Africa, Africa Must Unite, and all these works, if you read them, you will be able to understand where Nkrumah is coming from by saying that the independence, all of them, the African states, is meaningless if it doesn't, if it is not through unification of the African continent. Independence was supposed to be meaningful for us if we had united the African continent. Then our cultures, of course, then would be preserved. Our tribes, this encroachment where you are seeing that in South Africa now they have legalized the homosexuality, Botswana, and all this. All this is encroachment, European encroachment onto the African continent, into the African continent. You see, and all the other values which are coming from the West and they are forcing it on the African continent is because the independence would be compromised now. We are having a compromised independence. We got the independence, but then it was compromised during that process that we did not complete the liberation process. So that's where we are even right now, that we need now to wage a different war now, which is even a worse, much worse war, that we have to wage a war against our own people who are in power because they look like us now. The representatives of colonialism now, the colonialists, the new colonialists now, they look like us. So now that is the struggle that we have today, that we have to wage a war against these people who look like us and they are representatives of colonialism in order to defeat this system. So which is going to be, even a much more difficult task for us.
I might not have phrased it well, but that's really that catch me. That's really powerful and true. That's why now people are turning against their heads of states, and yeah, everybody might be wondering why. But the same thing again when you talk about that this cutting of China from getting the raw material, it's the same thing also what they are doing, because I talk about Dangote, it's a topic that we are following, and also it's so much present and it's happening. So the thing that what they thought that they can do worse to Dangote is to cut him from getting the source, which is the raw material, which is the crude oil.
Yeah.
Uh, his country is
Yeah.
producing
So yes.
has a natural resource, but they couldn't get. They just cut him from that. Yeah.
So even after independence, the independence leaders, most of them who were overthrown. Of course, Nkrumah warned everyone in 1963. During that period, we had some nationalist leaders, but during that period, because the United States had emerged as a very strong state, a very strong imperialist state, and Nkrumah had seen the domination of the United States in Latin America. And actually, even in the speech he gave in 1963 in Addis Ababa, Nkrumah mentioned that we don't want to turn, do we want to turn, he asked a question, do we want to turn the African continent into another Latin America? You know, to become a prey, unwilling. Actually, he said, do we want to become an unwilling prey of imperialism, like Latin America, which has been struggling with imperialism for the last 100 years? So even during this period, Nkrumah warned them. But these nationalist leaders, which nationalism was not enough during that period, it was not enough to be nationalistic. You had a lot of nationalist leaders like Olympio and all the others. They were proud. These were proud people who loved their nations, right? Their new nations. But Nkrumah warned them that this is not enough. We have to unify and consolidate and build a bigger defense. We have to build a bigger defense because imperialism is more sophisticated. Actually, he used the term that uh, imperialism is so sophisticated a system for newly independent African states to deal with. They were too small. And what he meant is that imperialism has built defenses within itself, institutions like the military, for example. It has built within itself the media, propaganda, and all these security. It has built, spy agencies like the CIA, FBI, and all these. All of them, they are there to crash dissent. So the United States had emerged strongly, through this. Now, they had built, of course, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, which came later on, of course, again after 1945. I think it was formed in 1944. So he had seen all these instruments that the United States had put in place. And that is simply because the United States had emerged out of World War II very strong and rich, because it did not actively participate into this war. It is Russia and all the other European countries which participated. All right. United States was supplying the weapons majorly. It came on later. It came on late when almost it had become rich because it was giving loans to Europe to fight, for them to continue to fight. All right. So Nkrumah saw the emergence of this powerful state, and then he warned the heads of state in the 1963, all right, 1960s, and all through the 1960s until he was removed from power in Ghana, and then he would go to Guinea. So what these nationalist leaders had achieved is that they had built up some industries, all right, and you can see that they used the state to build up a couple of industries in manufacturing. And actually, some people even have estimated that up to 1970, Africa had captured about 70% of global, manufacturing and industrialization. But then what followed 1970 was that when they overthrew most of these leaders, as Nkrumah warned in 1963, when they overthrew all these leaders, then the United States came with its newly created institution, the World Bank and the IMF, all right, which it dominated. And Nkrumah, of course, points out to this very well. I normally talk about it in Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. If you read the chapter, called The Mechanisms of Neocolonialism, in that book, it's a very simple chapter. You can even Google it and read it. It lays out for you, it gives you the brief of the whole process of what the United States is doing and the whole Western world is doing, right now today. Okay, whether it comes to the media, the military, the Hollywood. Nkrumah even talks about Hollywood, right? He talks about the religious groups which have been created, some of the bogus religious groups which are created in the United States and other European countries, and they are brought, into our countries. So a lot of things, the infiltrations, all of them, he talks about them. So all these institutions were too powerful for us as independent states, as African independent states, to deal with them. So nationalism became insufficient to deal with this problem. All the industries were now privatized under the supervision of World Bank. The structural adjustments what the so-called structural adjustments. And of course, even right now, we see it coming back. The World Bank coming back aggressively, and the International Monetary Fund, they are coming back aggressively into the African continent. So all the industrialization we had achieved and captured about 70% of global manufacturing was reversed. And now this is simply, to come back to your point of Dangote, this is simply because the bourgeoisie, or the industrialists in the capitalist world who control most of their governments, as you see in the United States, that the capitalists, they are the ones who control the governments. They feared competition from our countries, that if you put up these countries, if you put up these industries in these countries, they are going to compete against them. All right. And they are not going to get the market. They are going to compete for this market. And this is simply the same thing that is happening with Dangote. The fear by Europe. There's an article which came out, I think, about a few days ago, and they say that 90% of industries in Europe, refineries, about 90 refineries in Europe are going to close because of the Dangote refinery. And there's another article which came out yesterday, and he's saying that the Dangote refinery is going to have a lot of effect on the global oil market. All right. So they never wanted this, that the Africans should build up corporations which will compete against their own. But China, of course, succeeded at that. China succeeded at that. But because China was unified, okay, so now this is the fight we see, that they are fighting against Dangote. All these, which we hear that Nigeria has 4 refineries and those refineries are not working, it is the process of, that is the process of undermining, African corporations. And so that process did not stop at demonizing the state in our countries and weakening the state and saying the state cannot manage assets, the state cannot manage this. And also this narrative, of course, a lot of Africans bought it, that the state cannot manage things and therefore should be privatized. But then when you privatize, who takes over your assets? It's the Western world who takes over all these assets. And some of the assets, they never wanted to run them. They just wanted to collapse them so that there will not be competition against Western industries. So that is basically what happened. And that's the same thing that we are seeing, that is being transferred from the 4 Nigerian oil refineries, which have a capacity of meeting, close to 80% of Nigerian needs. Because Nigeria's oil refineries, they have a capacity of 450,000, barrels per day if they are working to full capacity. Now, they are taking that attack on the Nigerian, refineries and manufacturing sector. They are taking it now to Dangote. They are pushing that war against Dangote. And of course, they fight from outside, as we see that Chevron, companies like Chevron, and all these, ExxonMobil, Total, Shell, these are all the institutions, and combined it together with their media, which we spoke about here. And I would encourage people to go out and look at the presentation which we did, and the broadcast which we did on the broadcast we did on media, on the false propaganda by the Western world. We have that broadcast was done a few days ago. It's important that you go out and pay attention to it, because all this information, we cannot pack it in 1 hour. It is very difficult for us. So we keep breaking it down so that people can be able to understand. So combined with their media, which we already analyzed here, and all these banks, you had Dangote, during the summit which happened in Barbados, the Afrexim summit, the annual Afrexim summits which happened in Barbados. Dangote talking about banks. The foreign banks never wanted us to finish the refinery. They were sabotaging us during the COVID period. All right. And if you go to those banks which he's talking about, where did Dangote really borrow the money? And these banks were saying that, they were saying they were fighting against the refinery, and they were saying he has to pay money even if during the COVID period people were not working, and he paid the money. Right. Which banks was that? It was Standard Chartered Bank. All right. If you go and look at the banks where Dangote borrowed some money, the international banks, is Standard Chartered Bank, and this is a British bank. All right. So they work together, the banks, the military, the media, and their corporations. So they are working together to see that they frustrate this endeavor, and again continue to say that Africans are incapable but it is coming all the way from this history. First of all, the control of the markets, control of the raw materials. Remember those two things always: control of the markets, control of the raw materials. So the rest, all of them, the things which we say we make noise, corruption, all these are basic things. They are not the real issues. The real issue is the control of markets and the control, of raw materials. Those are the most important things that they are looking, for. So all the other things, media, which people will make a lot of noise, media freedom, what, the media is just a tool which is used. All right, politics is a tool which is used, so that when you capture politics, you have almost captured everything. So now they captured and compromised the political system on the African continent. Now that is where we are, we are facing, why we are facing all these challenges, and we see the attack on Dangote. We see that Africa's, manufacturing share of manufacturing globally has reduced from 7% in the 1970s. Now we are below, 4%. That's where we are right now. Our share on global manufacturing. So of course, it's unfortunate, but then, one of our ancestors said that every generation must find its mission, and either fulfill it, or, betray that mission which has been given to it. I think it's Franz Fanon who said that. So we have to find that, mission that was given to us, and fight on. We have to continue to fight on, because our ancestors, of course, they have already done a lot. They have contributed a lot to put us where we are. That right now we are more equipped than they were. We have more resources at our disposal than they were. I can sit here and communicate to 10,000 people, 25,000 people, 50,000, a million people. For them, they never had that kind of opportunity, but still they use the resources which they had. So it is our time also, I think, to make a contribution.
Definitely, definitely. That's a right place to end it. Really, thank you very much, Kwame, for sharing this with us. So I just shared the link for our broadcast in which we did the Western media attacking the Dangote refinery, oil refinery. So please go ahead and listen to it. You really learn a lot how these people work, and their work is very obvious. As Kwame said, it's nothing new. Even when they try to throw our governments, which are more pan-African, which are not obeying to their rules or whatever they're demanding from their, it all has been the same. They work in a very synchronized way. It starts from, from the beginning, demonizing the leader, and then, weaponizing rebels in your own country, sanctioning you so that people turn against the government. Accusing you as a genocider then when you fight the terrorists in your country. And then it's all the same. It's all the same. It's just us who refused to learn from history. Thank you, Kwame, and Fred Bantu, Mikhail Newman, who else? Black. Thank you very much, all of you, for your questions, for reminding people to share. Dylan Kun, can you be Afri? There was somebody who asked a question. Just, we always try to make our people here to be part of our discussion. So Mikhail or Michael Newman asked, do you think the West is trying to undermine the East African Federation, meaning he's talking about the three countries, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya? He or she, I think it's a he, fearing its important step to African unity. Do you think
Yeah.
so?
First of all, on that's a huge subject. But
Yeah.
in the first place, during the formation of the Organization of African Unity, which was a compromise, but in itself, the Organization of African Unity, it would not have been formed if it was not Nkrumah's insistence of forming a union. So the people who never wanted to form a union, or were compromised in the process of forming a union, felt itself in forming the Organization of African Unity. But during that period, there was two, thinkings. The one which was calling for a union, and the other one which was led by Nyerere, which said that we should form the regional economic communities. The East African community is a regional economic community. But Nkrumah was against these, that they would be used by imperialism. to penetrate. He wanted a unified continent so that we should not divide it. He never wanted the continued division of the African continent, but we should rather bring back the African people. So that is it from that side. Now, the East African community, it would be beneficial to the African people to the extent that it is undermining Western interests. And now, to the extent that it is undermining the Western interests, then it would be destroyed by the imperialists. So let me repeat that. The East African community would be beneficial to the Africans to the extent that it is undermining the interests of the imperialists. But to that extent, when it undermines the interests of the imperialists, then imperialists will come and destroy it. And we saw a little bit of that when the East African, the so-called ICRAF, the East African Community Regional Force, was created to go and stabilize the Democratic Republic of Congo in the eastern part. Remember that Democratic Republic of Congo, Nkrumah had been there in the 60s to try to bring it back, to take it back to the Africans, because countries like Belgium, United States, Britain, and all these had captured it to take the raw materials, which continues up to today. Nkrumah tried to solve that problem in the 60s, but he faced a lot of challenges and even wrote a book on it called the Challenge of the Congo. He wrote a full book, which was looking at his experiences there, and then how he saw the problem in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, the East African community sent a regional force there. And if you look at a video which is very much available on the internet and even available on my YouTube channel, which is called Africa Reimagined, when the East African regional force, East African Community Regional Force, which was a military, which is a military alliance by the East African states to go into the Congo and stabilize the place and remove the rebels and stuff like that. When it was announced, in that room, there was France, there was Britain, there was the United States, there was South Korea, there was all these countries. Belgium was there when they were announcing this force. So the attaches, the military attaches of these imperialistic countries were present. Even Japan was there, right? Britain and all these imperialist countries, German, they were there. So you could see on their faces that they are uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable, and very unhappy about it. All right, that the Africans have, mobilized themselves and they have gone to solve their own problem. So you can see that during that process, they sabotaged the process, and then that's when they brought in people like Ruto. Now you see where Ruto is currently, is with the United States. Ruto then developed some conflict with the president of Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay, now problems have been escalated between the president of Democratic Republic of Congo and the president of Rwanda. Both of them are presidents in the East African community. So you can see that the divide and rule tactic continues, and what did that lead to? It led to the withdrawal of the East African Community Regional Force from the Democratic Republic
But
of
that
Congo.
thing, the Sekedi has a great contribution. I mean, he has been like one confused man contributing a hell for that chaos.
Yes,
And
but
this is a big topic. I really want to remind our people we have another live stream in which Kwame will be with you. It's really a big topic. Tanzania president selling the important part of the country just for $39 million to an Indian rich man. So please, I mean, there are people there, but I think you are finalizing it. I don't want to cut you.
yeah,
Say a few words.
yeah. So that issue of the East African Regional Force, of course, also came because the United States is talking to different people in different way. They're talking to Ruto. During that period when they deploy that force, they would talk to Ruto. The American diplomats were frequenting Ruto's office almost every week. They were over there, and of course they were talking to Tshisekedi too. All right, so they will be telling them different things, and then when they come, then they will start developing animosity towards each other, and they see each other as useless and stuff like that. The UN, which has failed in the Congo for almost 70, 60 years, is the one which is blaming Kagame now, that Kagame is the one who's destabilizing the place and stuff like that. So all these divisions are created, you see that you will not be able to understand what is really the problem. So confusion create chaos, and then of course you continue to steal the resources. So and remove the solution which was going to solve the problem, which is the East African regional force, East African community regional force, that was going to stabilize the the place. So these are the problem that these are the challenges that the East African community will only be successful to the extent that is not sabotaging their interests. So that's what it is. That's the answer to that question.
All right, thank you very much, Kwame. So just one question from the chat, like drop colonial language and promote Kiswahili to unite us. I mean, I am from Ethiopia, so unfortunately I don't speak Swahili, although I wish to. So if I speak my native language, it will be Amharic. Kwame is from Ghana and Uganda. Do you speak Swahili, by the way? I haven't
I
asked.
do.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
do.
so at
I
least you
do.
can do that. Well then, from where we are, one person was asking where is our motherland. So there you go. I have said that. But we are. I mean, I always say I'm born in Ethiopia, but I'm an African. That's my wish in my passport to be the birthplace in Ethiopia, but a citizen of African. So same is with Kwame and many, I think, Pan Africans. All right,
Yeah, I
then.
see. I see
Yeah.
Michael Newman. I see Michael Newman here, mentioned about the book called Kicking Away the Ladder by the economist Hajun Chang. I think I've read that book. It's a very good book, which talks about how the West, undermines industries, in the developing world. It's a very, very good book. And thank you everyone who has been part of this. Pedro,
Yeah. Yeah.
Pedro Jamot, Daylan, Kanyubi, yeah, Dylan Kanyubi, Son of Thunder, Fred Bantu, everyone who's participated, great, great love for you guys. Black, we love you guys, everyone. Thank you for supporting the channel. We really, really, really appreciate you and love you all. Muted, you're
Yeah,
muted,
the
Mahlet.
people are lined up for the other one that is you 26 minutes late, and they're even commenting. So that it's hot already. So you go and join that. And I really invite everyone on behalf of Connect Africa to join Kwame. He will be, I don't know, maybe just 2 minutes to transit on the next stream. Subscribe to the channel and you will see a title which is going to be live in 2 minutes. Tanzania president sells important port to India for just 39 millions of dollars. So join that, you will learn a lot. Thank you very much, and we will see you on the next one. It's a bye-bye from us.